Good morning. I am coming to you live Thursday morning, Franklin, Tennessee. I have Callan behind the camera today, and we are doing Brave Club, Quilt Club Part 3. This is like the halfway mark. I can't believe it's August already. Happy August 17th. Today is actually a pretty straightforward month, and what I'm really excited about today, even though it's specific to this quilt because of the fabrics we're using and it's part of this club, as many of you know, I like doing all kinds of quilting. I like doing these club quilts that are very specific to a collection. This one, of course, is for my Brave collection. I like doing all kinds of sewing. I started this week by sharing with you like my entire wedding dress alteration, and thank you so much for all your lovely comments. That was exciting to share that and wonderfully fun to read all of your responses. I showed you yesterday some amazing EPP from Lydia Cheney that she has done with my Brave and Love Always Refresh, which of course some of the Love Always Refresh colors and fabrics are in this quilt along with Brave. So like I love it all, but I will say that I really, really love Dresdens. It's one of the first things that I taught myself nearly 20 years ago now when I was doing kind of a slow walk into quilt making, because for me the fabric design came first, and then I started, of course, playing around with patchwork and quilt making, and I thought that Dresdens were absolutely magic. I could not really figure out how something that looked like this became this really perfect point, and it's so foolproof. So that's what we're focusing on today. We're focusing on the Dresdens for this quilt, but the great thing is, even if you're not making this quilt, or whether you're making it as part of the club, or you've got the PDF pattern from us, or you haven't started yet, this is a wonderful primer in Dresdens, or at least I hope it is. I want to share the process start to finish of Dresdens with you because it's such a wonderful thing to add to any quilt. I love applique, and they become an applique element in quilts. We're doing little quarter Dresdens, and they're quarter because they're not a full circle. You can do half ones, you can do full ones, you can do 3/4, and they kind of end up looking like this sprayed flower. I have just found them to be so beautiful, so versatile. But specifically speaking about our quilt, today we're going to use 3 fabrics. We're going to use this really pretty sunny yellow echinacea fabric, and we're going to use the cathedral in coral, and we're going to use giggle in grass. So these pretty easy to cut because we're not fussy cutting these. But so first I want to go over what we're going to do with the echinacea to try and get all of our points looking about the same. In other words, where the flower is in the echinacea print, we want it to be in about the same place. It doesn't matter if you've chosen to put the cone of your cone flower at the very top or down here or even wherever you want to put it. I think one of the reasons that echinacea has been so popular over the years is it's really easy to cut. You can get a lot of fussy cut elements out, and certainly it puts holes in your fabric, but the way that it all packs together, it's really easy to get some very regular fussy cut designs. So I'm going to show you just a couple of tricks of how I got it out of this 3/4 yard piece that's part of your kit. You need 12 of them for echinacea because we have this in 4 places, and each one uses 3, okay? So with a 3/4 yard piece, you do pretty much have the opportunity, no matter where it's cut, because this is only a 3-inch repeat. You might remember that from last month because we also did some fussy cutting. You would have, no matter where your fabric's cut on the repeat, an opportunity to get pretty much this exact style of flower fussy cutting. In other words, having that cone all the way at the tip. The book is going to show you a layout, and it actually shows like that first kind of bumping up and down row of echinacea templates, or rather the Dresden templates. It kind of shows you 9 across. For whatever reason, I was able to get 8 across and I didn't have to bump. So that was probably just like a little digital thing. But honestly, you can probably get out of this yardage this is the template. You can probably get 16. So no matter how or where the fabric was cut in the print. Something that I did first is trace, okay? I just decided, first of all, these Mylar templates are wonderful because you can see through them, but they're not so rigid that I recommend using them with a rotary cutter, okay? I recommend using them with a pencil or a pen to trace around and then go back and cut however you like. And we'll get to that in just a second. But in order for me to get all of my Dresden blades, is what these individual shapes are called, on the same spot of the echinacea flower, I decided where I was going to place my first one. And it's about 1/4 to 1/2 inch above the tip of this. And so I just decided to go ahead and draw a dark line all the way across this fabric repeat. And I use kind of a darker pen here so that you could see it. Normally I'd probably use something lighter color. But basically I just held my grid so that a little 1/4 inch mark here was above a row of cone flowers. Okay, so every time the 1/4 inch passes through the flower here, it touches the tip of the flower touches the 1/4 inch mark, so that, and I've drawn a line all the way across. I hope that makes sense, so that I sort of have created this line across that sits 1/4 inch or so above the top of this flower. Okay, so what that does is I've basically gone ahead and marked the top line of every single one of these guys. So I know when I lay this down, it's really easy to center this because you can eyeball the way the cone flowers operate vertically on top of each other. You can eyeball that point coming down to the middle of this 1, 2, 3, 4th flower. But having that line across the top always lets me set my cone or my Dresden template in the exact same up and down point, because this way is super simple. But one other thing that I did is I put a little halfway mark here, because I think this guy is exactly 4 inches wide. It is. So I put a little halfway mark here to note that that's the middle. And this template does have, in the paper one, if you got the PDF pattern, it does have little stitch lines as well, because that seam allowance will go away. So that's basically it. And I went ahead and with the pink pen, I've marked out all my Dresdens, okay? So what I would do after I've got them all marked out is I would come back with just a simple, smaller, easier to move around straight edge. And I would just lay that straight edge on my trace lines and cut. Now, don't cut more than you have to, because you might want to save some fabric. Okay, so just cut barely past your corner markings of each shape. Okay, you can do this with scissors if you like, but I will say, as long as you're nice and accurate with scissors, I will say that something like a Dresden plate or just a fan or a half fan, the accuracy of your seams is so important, because one whole shape is going to have a lot of seams, right? So that also means that the accuracy of your cutting is pretty important. So cutting right on that drawn line, tracing it well, cutting it well, and sewing it well is really important. Those things are always important, but I am not an incredibly careful cutter, a hugely careful sewer when it comes to my seam allowance, regularness, and being like consistent all the time. I have to move everything away now. But with Dresdens, I am a lot more careful, but particularly if you're gonna make a Dresden that's a full circle, by the time you sew all those seams and come around and close it, if it's waving and not wanting to sit flat, that has to do with the accuracy of your cutting and your seaming. How do we sew these guys? I'm gonna show you. So I already have some pre-cut here. Just follow your instructions. I believe it's 12 of the echinacea, 16 pieces from this giggle fabric because we use that in both fans. We use it 2 in each one of these, and we also use 2 in each one of these in each of the outer 4 corners. So I'm just going to lay out one for you here. Let's see, ready, don't need that. So the difference between cutting this one and cutting the other fabrics that we're not fussy cutting is you could layer up 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of this fabric. You could fold it onto itself and just make a cut there. You could trace it in one place on the top and then just cut through 4 layers. So it's a little bit quicker than the fussy cutting, okay? So let's just focus on one of these fans. There is a preparatory step with doing these. At the very first time that I did it, I was like, oh, that's how they do it. Well, that makes sense. So how you make those pretty little points is you actually fold these on their length in half and you sew across the top, 1/4 inch away from the top edge. And I'm gonna do that with all 5 of these, and I'm gonna chain piece it, which means I'm just going to keep sewing without stopping all 5 of these. And I'm gonna go ahead and chain piece them in the order, just for fun, that they're gonna be placed in that fan, okay? Whether or not you, because I'm chain piecing, I'm not going to knot my thread or backstitch my thread at the beginning or the end. That's totally personal preference. So I've come to the end of one, I'm not going to pick up or cut my threads. I'm going to start the next one. This is how we chain piece. Probably knew that. You could chain piece all, 36 pieces, if you like. It's probably more than that, I can't remember. Maybe it's 40, I think it's 40. There's 5 pieces, and there's 8 fans. Okay. Easy peasy. Look at this, that's fun. Okay, so we have all these little chain pieces here, and I'm gonna carefully snip the threads in between. So this, when you flatten it back out again, it creates a point, but before we do that, we need to cut off on the folded side. I am gonna cut off this seam allowance very carefully. Don't cut through the threads. That's just gonna allow us to have a little less bulk in the top point, because this fold right here is where the top point is gonna rest. And I'm gonna do that with all of them. I'm just gonna clip off that little corner. Okay, so you can see, I'll do it with a little bit darker fabric. You can see here that we've got a point now, but we need to turn this right side out. Before I turn them right side out, I usually finger press that seam allowance open. And you can see that cutting that point allows that seam allowance to kind of follow the point of the folded top edge of this. So you want to be sure that you don't have it like over here. You really want to, I usually just eyeball these. You want to keep that seam in the center, and you can just flip it to the right side. And this is your Dresden point. So the beauty, and I think the magic of this, is you already have a finished edge and you don't have to worry about turning this down. So for those of you that do applique and you like doing curved applique, I think that, you know, probably why I like this so much is because I know that this applique section is going to be all beautiful and turned down and kind of pre-finished and ready to put down. Okay, so they remind me of little hoods on jackets when they're turned like this too. Okay. And for those of you watching, if you have questions, Callan can let me know. But if you have questions and you want me to come back and write you the answer to it rather than me answering live here, just be sure to wait until after this live video is posted. I forgot to finger press. And you can type your question into the comments, okay? There are, I don't recommend sticking your scissors up there to get a really good point. If you weren't watching, I might do it though, I'm just saying. But I've got a lot of dull scissors in the house, so. But you could use a point turner if you have such a thing. You could appropriate the end of a small paintbrush or whatever you like. So what I'm gonna do now is just press these so that they're nice and flat. One on top of the other, make sure I've got it in center. Okay. Seam allowance open. It's so fun too, even to see the fussy cutting on the back side of the little petals. It's a good indicator that your fussy cutting is going to look nice and centered. An amazing thing about that Dresden blade template too is that this is all, you know, it's very mathy, so that it all comes together and can create a perfect circle if you want it to. If you did, like, there's 5 blades in each quarter, so if you did a total of 20 blades, you can make a Dresden that is a full big circle. And the other cool thing is if you were to cut this smaller or to trace it and make a smaller one, you can keep making smaller and smaller and smaller Dresden blades and plates, rather, the whole full circle by just shrinking this down, and then it just becomes this more kind of petite little circle. Okay, so we have our pretty finished little blades here. And the next thing to do is to sew these one to the next with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And this is where you really want to pay particular attention to getting your seam allowances really nice and accurate. I would probably backstitch at the beginning of these because once you have, I mean, you start off with a folded edge right here, so it's not like you're sewing all raw edges and you're going to turn everything down. This is already turned down, so you want to go ahead and make that nice and secure with a backstitch, but it's totally up to you. I just like doing that with my Dresden, so I know that when I'm starting to lay them out and manipulate them and applique them onto their background fabric, that they're not going to be splitting apart. If they do split apart, it's not that big of a deal. You can kind of whip it down a little bit extra as you're sewing it to the quilt background, okay? So I'm just going to pin that first edge, so I'm sure that both folded edges are really well matched. I'm not going to bother to pin at the bottom. I'm still getting used to this machine and how backstitching works. Just keep an eye on your 1/4 inch. And just be sure to sew all the way through the bottom. I've got a light color thread, so it's hard to see, but that sewing line should basically take you down to the center middle of that little short end. All right, so I've got these two together and I'm alternating. So these fans alternate between the two colors, but they begin and end with the echinacea. And when I go to sew this next one down, I am going to just make sure, I don't want to have to stop and press between everything. I'm just going to make sure that this seam allowance is out of my way, and because basically when I come sew through here, I'm going to end up right next to it down here. Okay, so I don't want to get this caught underneath here. I just want to make sure everything's free and away and over to the left. And you'll continue that each time you add a new blade. Just make sure all that seam allowance is away. Okay. sure. Okay. So they're touching just about, okay? Right up against each other. Moving on to giggle, piece number 4. Now we make sure all the seam allowance is out of the way again. Last one, almost there. Hold. Good. Alrighty, Risky. So there we have all our pretty blades together. And that looks really good. We have just about, mine aren't absolutely perfect. Like you can see a little bit more stem on this one and this one. That one you see a little bit less at the very top. So don't fret too much over that. I promise that if they're even close, I would say even within a ½ inch of one another, that your eye kind of tends to correct that when you look at something. Now the back, you know, if I had, say, a Dresden fan that was shorter and it stopped here and I was going to end up appliquing another center on top of that, I would probably, because you would have space to, I would probably press seam allowances open. If you press seam allowances open here, I mean you can if you want, but they tend to really get on top of each other at the bottom. If you wanted to press them open, I would press these outer 2 open first and then come back and press the ones inside of it open over the top of them. So you can press open or you can press them all to one side. It really doesn't matter at all. What's most important before you press and set it aside is that you make sure that you've kind of created a right angle. If you've sewn and cut all these pieces accurately, this edge and this edge should be able to create, you know, that perpendicular corner to a square, okay? Because that's where they're gonna sit. They're gonna sit on the edge of a square, this black square right here, and the same with the outer corner. So these look pretty good. If it's just a little bit off, where it tends to get off is down here, because your machine kind of naturally pushes the fabric over when it feels that seam allowance happening. That's nothing to worry about. You can just, once you go to lay it down in the applique process, any inconsistencies can get trimmed off and kind of fall into the seam allowance of those squares, okay? So no freaking out, against the rules. Okay, so I'm just gonna press everything to one side. So pretty. You can use all your fancy little sprays, whatever makes your sewing room smell nice. Totally up to you. And that is our Dresden fan. Yay, us. Okay, so you need to make 4 of these and 4 of these, and by the end of that, my guess is you're going to be basically an expert on Dresden fans. So that's everything this month. It's pretty straightforward, which it's nice to have a simple one in the middle. I was going to go ahead and have you do some appliquing of these, but I thought, you know what, the middle of the club is probably a good time to do any sort of like catch up that you want to do on month 1 or month 2. So I hope you enjoyed that little up close look at making these fans. And again, thanks for joining. If you have any questions, you can leave them in comments after I get this posted, and I will see you in September for month 4. Over and out.